And welcome to episode 62 of the Drunken Boxing Podcast, coming at you better late than never once again from Beijing. I had originally hoped to release this podcast in January of this year, as I recorded it in December of 2024, but got a little bit behind schedule, so we're releasing it now. Happy New Year, the year of the snake. As well as Happy New Year in general terms, because the last time we had a podcast, it was still 2024. So Happy Western New Year, and we have just gone through Chinese New Year over here, and we have just entered the Year of the Snake. So Happy New Year to everybody who celebrates the Chinese New Year. All right, let's get into some Mushin martial culture news. I have released a few videos since the last podcast release. One is, in fact, glimpses into Shingyi snake shape. This is a brief video with glimpses, like I've done for many of the other animals, taken directly from lessons that are on the Huajin online learning program. So you can take a glimpse of not only our Shingyi snake from my Hebei lineage, but also get glimpses of how some of the lessons within the program are compiled. If you're interested in the program, as always, it's available at patreon.com/Mushin martial culture, and you can learn the authentic arts of Shingyi and Baguazhang there. Alright, I also released episode 4 of The Secrets of Shingyi, the documentary. This one being quite a lengthy episode, around 15 odd minutes, and we're going deeper through the story. This one has a strong Shanxi bias, but it's interesting because it helps us unravel the onion that is the history of Shingyi. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out. I also released, once again, glimpses from our online learning program, this time focusing on a lesson that was released on Shingyi staff applications and partner drills, specifically on Drunken, or drilling staff. And I've taken some glimpses for you to see some content from the program, this time focusing on application and partner work. The program is comprehensive, so we teach everything from internal skill building to forms, weaponry, partner drills, application, function, and use. All right, let's get into today's episode of the podcast. My guest today is David Rogers, who hails all the way from the United Kingdom. He has been training in Chinese martial arts for a very long time, since around 1984, and he's a closed-door disciple of a Master Deng Jan Gong in the south of China. He's actually the only non-Chinese to have learned the entire Dung family Hap Kune system, which is Shaquan in Mandarin. Quite a well-known style in the south. Relatively not as well-known in the west, but in Chinese martial arts, Shaquan is one of the great southern styles of Chinese martial arts, or Hap Kune is one of the great southern styles of Chinese martial arts. And David Rogers studies in Guangzhou or Guangdong, Canton province, with his teacher. He's done so for very, very long. He's deeply within the family, within the system. He's a full representative of the system. And he also opened the Rising Crane Center in 1995, where he continues to teach Chinese martial arts that he has learned, as well as running a traditional Chinese acupuncture clinic. Additionally, he's got an extensive background studying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, particularly focusing on the no-gi variation. And he studied this with the great Braulio Estima, who is a world-class, world champion, high-level practitioner of the art, in both gi and no-gi, by the way. This was actually a really interesting discussion. I had a great time talking to him. We see eye to eye on a lot of ideas and concepts, including the realm of grappling, competition, MMA, and its place within a martial arts broader spectrum, and the situation of martial arts as it is. Let's get right into it. I bring you David Rogers. And welcome to the Drunken Boxing Podcast. I'm very happy today to be speaking to Master David Rogers all the way from the UK. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for chatting to me today. So, actually, I one of my previous episodes of the Drunken Boxing Podcast, I put out a message asking people if there's anyone specific or any suggestions they had for a guest they'd like to hear on the podcast. And actually you were a suggestion that came through one that I got there, and I had seen you online before, and I had known of you, and it's actually, I was kicking myself thinking, why did I never actually think of just initiating this? But nonetheless, here we are today, all thanks to one of the listeners who wanted to hear more about you.
That's nice, good to hear.
Yeah. So maybe you can give a brief introduction. Well, it doesn't have to be brief. I don't know why I keep saying that. It doesn't have to be brief. Just, give an introduction of yourself and your background.
Okay, so my name's David Rogers. I'm from the UK. I've run a school of Chinese martial arts called the Rising Crane Center, and that's been running for about 26 years now. Started in Bedford, UK, but after the lockdown, I moved to Cardiff, so I'm now teaching in Wales.
Mm-hmm.
My own training started in 1984 when I was 14. That is with Chinese martial arts. When I was a kid, I did judo, boxing, taekwondo, etc. My dad was kind of keen on getting me into kind of combat sports stuff, but I never really gelled with it. And I really loved the kind of vibe of the Chinese martial arts. I remember asking a taekwondo teacher when I was a little kid if he could teach me tiger crane form, which everyone found very amusing. Really? Obviously I was just really into Kung Fu. When I was 14, I actually found a Kung Fu school locally. In the UK at that time, it's all like Southern style. So there was some Wing Chun, Hong Ga, Pak Mei, Lao Ga, and some Choi Lei Fat. I had friends that had like trained in various styles, and didn't have like an authentic, very high level instructor at that time, but we kind of pieced together training. And then I traveled to find better teachers, first of all in the UK. And then when I was 20, I went to China and I met my Sifu, Deng Jan Gong, who's still my Sifu today. So that was really the sort of turning point. I've been training about 6 years by then. But that was when I really found what I was looking for.
You just up and went to China on a whim, or was there another reason, or?
There was no other reason than to learn Kung Fu, but it was more than a whim. It was an absolute like need, drive. I was obsessed at that age. As a teenager, I was just like watching Kung Fu movies, training Kung Fu, trying to learn everything I could, every book I could, every video I could. I just had to get to China. That was my thing. And then in those days, it was kind of the Shaw Brothers movies and 10 Tigers of Canton and all those kind of things. It's like Canton was the place. So I just had in my mind I want to go to Canton. I can't say why specifically, apart from the sort of influence of that. So I went to Guangzhou via Hong Kong. I went to Hong Kong, had some friends of friends there who kind of explained to me and got my visa sorted out, helped me out. I got on the train, and then I just basically arrived in Guangzhou. Didn't have any contacts in the Kung Fu world. I had one friend of a friend who found me somewhere to stay, and then I basically started just spending my days looking for teachers.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I was going to ask you. I was going to say, was there a specific teacher you knew you were going to go to, or was it just the place and then you were going to play it by ear when you got there?
It was just the place. I was going to play it by ear. I started off probably as most people would have done at that time, just going to the parks in the early mornings.
Right.
And practicing and then talking to people. At that time, I couldn't speak any Cantonese, but I had my friend could speak some English, so I had some help there. But the name Deng Jan Gong kept coming up because although I studied with a number of people. I just informally trained some Choi Lei Fat and some other sort of southern styles. But the name, his name kept coming up and saying, if you really want the best teacher, you should go see Master Dung. The first time I visited his school, he wasn't there, so that didn't happen. And then I trained, for example, I went to the Satao, the school where the government-run school, that's more the kind of contemporary southern stuff, wushu kind of thing. And there was the guy there who was at that time was the national champion. He was like the elite athlete.
What's his name?
Wang Jingguang at that time.
Huang Jianggang, he's a good friend of mine.
How amazing!
Yeah, he's a very good friend. I've taught with him so many times in the past, and he's one of the few people, honestly, in the sport wushu environment that I regard as being, I don't want to talk too single dimensionally, but he is a very special person with an immense amount of knowledge and experience in a sports field. He's really unique.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that's interesting because when he was younger, he studied with my Sifu's father.
Okay.
So some of the emphasis of the southern style, of the Nanchuan competition, like the judging criteria and all that kind of stuff, come from my Sifu's father, Dang Gumtao.
Okay.
So you could ask about Dang Gumtao.
Yeah, and Chen Changmian. I don't know if you ever met Chen Changmian. He's a Choi Lei Foot master down there. He was one of the people that compiled the Nanchuan routine. He passed. My Cantonese is basically non-existent.
So's my Mandarin, so fair enough.
But Chen is, it's a pretty common Chan.
Yeah. I will ask. I'm sure my Sifu knows him. So it's a
Yeah.
small world, isn't it?
Yeah, totally, totally. I mean, Huang Jiangang really he's trained with quite a few teachers, like you
Yeah,
mentioned your teacher, but he
yeah.
has quite a deep understanding of Southern styles, and like I said, he's quite unique in the sports field, and that's why I think once him and people like his generation, because those were people that because I was working within the sports wushu field for some time, but I was training with generations like him. It's not the same as what happened afterwards, and once that
It very.
generation's gone, I'm telling you,
Mm,
it's done. To be honest, but in terms of sport, the sport has got. Then they'll have no one to really refer to with regards to getting some understanding of traditional methods and actual kung fu ways.
I think when the advent of the Nando element of the competition really changed it, didn't it? That was like that early 2000s. Because
Yeah.
I had some students. I mean, I personally, the contemporary wushu stuff's not my thing. I was about to say that I went to study. I was just the name Deng Jan Gong kept coming up as
Yeah.
being sort of source of the traditional. So that's what led me back to that school. But some of my students used to compete in the contemporary. I had a student that got the national title, a couple of students, but one of them actually also went to the world he didn't win the worlds, but he competed for Great Britain.
Okay.
So there was, I'm kind of familiar with the contemporary stuff, but that was before the advent of the rule changes, which led to a
Yes.
much more exaggeration of the difficulty movements and a lessening of the fundamentals that kind of made this. I can't speak for the northern styles, but in the southern styles there seems to be a loss of the fundamental skills.
Right.
Um,
No,
so
that's
yeah,
true.
more,
It went to the focus on the difficulties and the acrobatics
yes,
and the scoring
yeah,
system heavily focused on that, and then the requirements were dropped, so it's basically
exactly.
become some strange gymnastics.
That's when they were pushing for the Olympics, right? So
Right.
it was that kind of time, because at that time I was in the British Kung Fu Council. I was the sort of director of the traditional Kung Fu. So,
Right.
but we had a traditional and a contemporary.
Is
Um,
is it the BCCMA or British Council for
that,
Chinese Martial Arts? Yeah.
that that's right, the British Council for Chinese Martial Arts. But this was back when I was involved in it. Was early 2000s. It's a long time ago. I'm not.
Right.
I'm independent now. I'm not involved in that.
It's
But I
best to
was at
be
the
that
time.
way, to be honest, especially with what we do. But that's a
Well, I
tough.
had students who compete, so even though I'm not particularly competitive by nature, I understand it's an important part, to
Hmm.
give people that venue. So we did start off by in the sort of traditional kung fu venue, and we also tried our hand at some of other things as well, the sanda, the contemporary stuff,
Right.
but eventually sort of mixed martial arts, because that was more of a sort of less control, but you could do your thing basically.
No,
So
I
that was the
agree.
sort of
I agree. I
from the
mean, yeah,
from the competition.
it's a more open format. So the reality is, if it's more open, it allows us to utilize more of our methods and techniques. People should
Yeah,
think of it as a format, not as a. Of course, within a format over time, things crystallize because they're the most
yeah,
efficient things within that rule set. But in theory, the format
exactly.
is more open.
Yes, exactly. But the environment and the rule set's kind of closer to, I guess, for want of a better word, real fighting. So
Exactly.
it's a format that allows an expression in the Chinese martial art. We have kick, punch, seize, wrestle, and fall. So those kind of five elements.
Hmm.
It's the only combat sport that allows you to express all those five. So it does. It's not perfect, but it's as close as you want to get, I would suggest.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
The Chinese spear, or qiang, holds a special place within Chinese history and martial arts. Revered for its versatility and efficiency, this powerful weapon has shaped not only the battlefield, but also the martial practices of China. Powerful kung fu styles such as Xingyi Quan and Baji Quan credit spear techniques as the foundation of their systems. In China, there is a famous saying, Bai Bing Zhi Wang, which translates to the king of all weapons, a phrase that refers to the great spear. The legendary Song Dynasty hero, General Yue Fei, was known for his unparalleled spear skills, as well as his unwavering fighting spirit and moral character. His legacy lives on, both as a martial artist and a symbol of loyalty and sacrifice. Now you can carry this legacy with you. Our Great Spear apparel honors General Yue Fei and the legendary spear, the king of all weapons. With powerful imagery and bold Chinese brushstrokes, this design pays tribute to his spirit while celebrating the timeless power of the spear and its lasting influence on Chinese martial arts. Available now in both hoodies and t-shirts in a variety of colors directly from our online store at mushinmartialculture.com. Wear the legacy. Embrace its strength. I agree. I mean, we should look at these formats, and you could always gauge them or categorize them in different ways. You could have punching, no kicking, etc. You could have punching and kicking with no throwing. You could have throwing only.
Yeah.
And then within each one of those, there's a spectrum of restricted with restricted clothing, restricted methods with no set clothing, and then all the way to the other end, etc., etc. So the more you go to the one side of the spectrum where it's more inclusive, it's going to cater to basically any Chinese martial arts, but it's also going to cater to cross martial arts systems, and that's what you want. Really.
When you put it that way, it's entirely logical, isn't it? To think of it as a format.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear when you describe it that way. That and then you remove the kind of stylistic element out of it, which is to say, you can do your thing, we can do our thing, and let's see how it goes.
Exactly.
So it's a degree of freedom. The other thing from people who are training for self-defense, the point being that although you might have a preference, you might like to punch kick, or you might like to wrestle, or you might like joint locks, you don't get to choose how the other guy comes at you. So having those kind of restricted, yes, it develops very specific attacking skill in those restricted areas, doesn't develop an all-round self-defense skill, i.e. can you use your punching against takedowns or against joint locks, or so it's that aspect of it appealed to me.
No, that's great. I think that's a very healthy mindset, and it's something that more Chinese martial artists should encompass. So that's great. I wanted to ask you, I mean, while we're getting through this, what year was it that you first went when you went into Guangzhou?
91.
Okay, so it's quite a while ago. I mean, China is very different today than it was back then. So
oh man, thank you much, even more since COVID. But yeah,
it's not the same since before COVID. It's a different place.
You find you are, I found that in the south. I don't know about Beijing. It's the same as it's not
the same anymore. It's that's why I call it the before times, before 2020.
Oh man, so it's like the whole country then. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So that was 91. Very different. It was getting the train in the old choo-choo train from Hong Kong with a shaky. They had television sets like precariously balanced on top of luggage racks, playing VHS tapes of like pirated kung fu movies. And that was like my first. It was like, wow, this is really different. Even between Hong Kong, Hong Kong was like a bit of a culture shock to me at that time, and then a few hours on the train, it was way different again.
Yeah.
So good times. And then literally within 10 years, that whole area where I was training had sort of been torn down and rebuilt. Now, of course, you hear, even the language now is disappearing. So everything's changing. Yeah, everything's changing.
Well, they've standardized the curriculum at school. So everybody at school speaks and is spoken to and taught in Mandarin. You can go home and speak your local dialect. And I understand in one sense that's to...
Yeah.
I mean, I was traveling through China back in those early days as well, and I'd go on the choo-choo train, as you say, from one village or one town to another, from Beijing to Inner Mongolia or through Shanxi, etc. And you stop at different places, and I mean, I speak Mandarin, and I couldn't understand these people, so I kind of understand it from that point of view, but it's...
Yeah, as a traveller, someone who's travelling all over, having that kind of standardised is super useful. I mean, I can see how good that is.
But on the other hand, you're losing...
There's a difference between you're losing the culture and kind of suggesting to people. It's not just the sake of like, oh, we're speaking that here, but when you go home, you speak your regional. It's more the suggestion that, well, you really ought not to. You really should encourage your parents at home to speak this. And so
exactly.
there has been a big shift. But yeah. Not to get too political, but yeah.
No, I mean, that's very valid. It's very true. I don't know what it was like when you were growing up at school in the UK, but we always had a second language. You always had, and okay, it's not going to be as fluent as what you learned, but it has something to do with wherever you're schooling. and I don't know why that's not a thing. Apparently,
Could be.
here you'd have to do extracurricular classes if you wanted to do, for example, your local dialect or whatever the case may be. And that's not going to happen because if you know what the kids are like at school here, they're up to their ears in homework. They don't have time for that.
Of course, yeah. It's inevitable. Where I am now in Wales, there was a very similar thing happen where the English sort of stamped out the Welsh language. So I'm in Wales now, but everyone here speaks English. So I'm very aware of being sort of on the other side of it here. Yeah. So it's, having seen it from both sides,
I interrupted you. You were saying, we got off topic, but it was very interesting. So you ended up there. You ended up at that Wushu sports school, and how did it go from there?
Well, no, because I mean, obviously, what an athlete, incredible. But I was just like thinking, I really wanted the traditional kung fu, and it wasn't. Despite having seen extremely skillful, extremely good people, it didn't like scratch that itch that I was after. I went back to my Sifu school for the second time, and he was there that time. Fortunately, some students were sort of practicing stuff, and he asked me if I'd learned something in the UK, and I said I did kung fu for 6 years. He asked if I could show a set. I did some Honga Tiger Crane, and Sifu goes, "Oh, that's like the kind of kung fu that my granddaddy taught," and I'm like, "Ooh, ears prick up." Okay. Anyway, and he explained how his grandfather was Honga and his father was a smaller, lighter guy and concentrated on the Hap Kune, which is the crane style that come from Wongan Lam. So the emphasis on the evasion and striking as opposed to the kind of bridging and heavy stances. So he was explaining how his father liked that, but in their family system, they had kind of both styles. So I was interested. He was explaining it, and he got up and he just demonstrated like a section of a form. And when you just see something, you go, "Yep, that's it. That's the one." Like
that's cool.
As soon as I want this guy. I want him to teach me. I had no doubt. I was like, this is it. So I said to him, "Oh, please, I'd like to learn. At that time, I was very lucky with the economy, because the UK and China at that time, and it's very different now, but at that time I was in a position where, having saved up some money and I could afford to go teach me privately every day, and I didn't have to work. I was just living. I lived there for 6 months the first time, and I was just full-time. I only come home when I literally felt my head was so full I needed to like assimilate and kind of train and take it all in, which I did. And then went back again, and he was like, "What do you want to learn this time?" I was like, No, I want to go over everything we did last time, but more detail, like more precise. And he was really happy because he was like, "Oh, actually, maybe this person's serious, actually wants this stuff." And then and then he said to me, "You need to improve your Cantonese and so on." In the third year I went back, we could speak, and he was like, "Okay, no, I'm going to show you much, much, much deeper now into this." And again, I concentrated initially on just the Hap Kune system from him for quite a long time. I sort of became his formal disciple as well. He hadn't done the Bai Si for many, many years, but he kind of started to bring that back into it as a sort of tradition, to preserve the tradition. He was actually the first person in Guangzhou after the Cultural Revolution to open up a old school Mogun, like a Kung Fu studio. His father.
That's interesting you say that. I mean, like my grand teacher Li Ziming, who was Bagua my grand teacher from my teacher's Bagua teacher. He did the first public Bai Shi ceremony in Beijing after the Cultural Revolution. And,
wow, what year was that?
Oh, that was early 80s, I must think.
Right.
Yeah, early 80s.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that's a precarious thing to do, because even like them participating, like my teacher participating in that he was one of his first 8 disciples, but they didn't know what to expect, and I'm sure it's pretty similar with your teacher's experience opening a school.
Yeah, I mean, his father basically said, "Oh, in this day and age, it's a different world now. We teach in parks, in like leisure centres. We don't, the old days of like challenge fights and all that. You don't really want to go back to all that stuff, do you?" And my super was like, "Yeah," because his granddaddy's time was very much like the old school, and much more. His father was a very gentle man, very, very high level kung fu, but known for being very diplomatic, very nice to people. Whereas his granddad was a scrapper. He was always getting into fights. He was the militia, and they used their honga to sort of protect the weak and so on. This was the sort of time of Wang Fei Hong, the same kind of era, same groups, so hung around with the same people. So my Sifu was like, no, I want to open a Kung Fu studio. And at that time, one of the things was that the Chinese government was saying, okay, you need to teach certain things, like, for example, Taiji for health, like the simplified Taiji form. Yeah, no problem. But after that, you can do what you want. So they do that, teach a group, and then they get the gloves out. They do the sandal, the wrestling, put the jackets on, they hit the bags, and they do all the old traditional conditioning exercises, the old weight training from the Hap Kune style, and lots of kind of combative stuff. So they really kept that. That was never lost. That people think that for many years people didn't practice that kind of stuff, but they always did. I mean, I've seen pictures.
They always did. I mean, and it's also ridiculous to think that people would suddenly have amnesia for everything that they did just before the Cultural Revolution. Like, my teacher was born, trained before, and lived through it, and then trained after and taught, and so did his teachers. So what are you talking about? Do you think they forgot their kung fu? Like, what kind of ridiculousness is that?
Yeah, was it really all lost? I mean, if you've trained a set for decades, it's just so much in the memory. You're never going to lose it, are you, if you've been taught properly?
My teacher used to tell me that they'd go out in the dark and train, like in the times when it was like difficult to train. So it's not.
I've heard say.
You've been to China enough. You know that this place is the Wild West. You think that laws are hard and heavy, and they are, but there's people that know how to just snake around the laws for absolutely anything you can conceive under the sun. So, and that's today. Never mind back then.
Yeah. So. And Chinese culture is so ingrained in the culture. I mean, I met one gentleman who was a master of the Buddha's palm, and he was like an itinerant kung fu teacher. He was traveling around China, and he actually said when he was working on a farm during the Cultural Revolution, everyone had to spend a year working on the farm, and at the end of the day, what they would do is when they get the campfire on, and they'd all practice kung fu sets and exchange. It was like it's still going on. It just,
Another thing that people don't realize is that it was also a politically driven persecution. So if you were a person that was respected in the current scheme of things, they left you alone, even if you were a kung fu master. And they kind of looked the other way when you were doing your thing. And that's an example of Li Ziming, like I was just mentioning my Bagua grandmaster. But my teacher's other teacher, his Shingyi teacher, was on the wrong side of the political spectrum. So he was just persecuted day and night, if you know what I mean. Like, he was. So, there's so much nuance. People just make it this simple black and white thing. They also don't realize there's a lot of political doublespeak in the people that are saying one thing or the other thing as well, for various reasons that we could talk about. But I mean, that's just the reality of it. It's also a promotion kind of thing. If you can play down what's here, you can pick up what's not here, or what came from somewhere else. So, there's a lot of that, and people just don't realize. And I think today people are kind of seeing it more with the internet, the ease of access to information, and video that's becoming so prolific in the way people communicate. And people being able to come into China and go to the countryside and go to the old villages and see, like, oh, Jesus, these guys still have some serious skills. And you see there's an 80-year-old dude with a hearing aid in his ear and a walking stick. And, he gets up and he does a form that you're like, what the hell was that? That's just some high-level kung fu. It's like, I never stopped training, That's exactly it. So they're kind of seeing that. I think people are slowly starting to understand that, it's does nobody, or Chinese martial arts in general, gets a disservice if people oversimplify the history and the reality of what was going on at those times.
Yeah, I'll try to make it fit into certain boxes that it was never just fit into, and then it always seems a little awkward, or it seems a little strange. But when you look at it within the context that it evolved, and it evolved rather than was assembled, which is why it doesn't quite fit in. But when you look at it from the inside, it's so consistent and it's so deep, and it's a lifetime study.
Yeah. Give us a little bit of background on your Hap Kune. Now, Hap Kune in Mandarin is Xia Jia or Xia Quan.
Right, correct.
It's give us a bit of background on that.
Well, the name Xia Jia Quan or Hap Kune was after Wang Yanlam. It was his students that named it in his honor, because his nickname was Dai Hap Da Xia, the sort of big hero or knight, because he used to use his kung fu. That's it. So he used to use his kung fu to kind of protect the weak. That's the story. So his last disciple, Wang Lun, was my Sifu's father's teacher in Hap Kune. There was an exchange between my Sifu's grandfather, who was a Hongama. He was called the Canton Stick King. He was very well known for his stick technique. And it's like the Hap Kune style being, as I say, based on evasion and movement rather than sort of the kind of power-packed bridges and stances of Hongar, which was really good for him because he was a big chap, but his son was small, and he basically, people could lift him up. So it was basically, you need to be working on the Hap Kune idea is that evasion, stepping in and out kind of thing. And then at close range, it tends to use more kind of wrestling and anti-wrestling as opposed to sort of some of the heavy bridging elements of Hong Kong, although both styles are excellent. But in the sort of scheme of things, Hongar is more the sort of tiger, Hap Kune is more the crane.
Okay.
Original idea. After Wang Yan Lam, the modern Hong Kong, which is sort of Lam Sai lineage, absorbed the crane, so it became, they're called the Tiger Crane School, which is kind of like the Hongar with some Hap Kune in it.
Okay.
So the original Hongar was a little different, and the original Hap Kune is very had concepts like what would in modern martial arts be sort of talking about slipping and head movement and stepping to angles and this kind of thing, which is becoming quite popular in mixed martial arts at the moment because people are sick, rather than like Muay Thai, which is awesome, but it faces the opponent, so you're bringing all your limbs into place. You're sort of square on, and they have that kind of clinching, which is similar to the southern concept of bridging, where you're in contact, throwing knees and elbows over the top, but sort of manipulating your opponent's balance, your hands. Exactly what we call the bridge. In Muay Thai, they kind of call it the clinch, but there's a lot of overlap on that. Hap Kune was like either step out the way or smash the arms, like hit the bridge, step to the angle. So if the person's like extending their hand trying to seek a bridge, you just basically hit the arm from under or over while stepping to an angle, and then when they punch, they extend the arm fully, which keeps them out of range. That was the concept of it. So
I'm looking at your, I mean, as we talk here, your WeChat icon is Pao Chuan from Hap Kune, which is literally that upward swinging movement. That's pretty iconic for what is considered the standardized old Nanquan routine. It's in there, but people think it's Hongar, and I'm like, no, it's not. It's from Hap Kune. It's Shachuan. All these long arm techniques. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly
no, because
right.
that Nanquan routine is a combination of stuff. So
that's
people
right.
mischaracterize it as Hongar. It's not Hongar. There's some Hongar in there for sure, but there's Hupgar. There's a whole lot of things in there actually.
There's a whole section which is taken from the Sulohorn set of the Hap Kune. So my Sifu's dad, like it's unmistakable if you know what to look for. It's an entire section. So that particular upswing punch. Now Wang Yan Lum used to practice that with weights, holding on to weights. So it's a kind of similar to concept nowadays people train with kettlebells, right?
Exactly.
So they used to use what they call the seti pai or moki pai. Seti pai is the stone plates or the wooden plates. So it's like something like a sex soul. There's the stone locks that you practice with that the wrestlers use. Imagine one of those that's a lot thinner, so that you can do the Pao Chuan with it without kind of cracking your knee on the way down. If that makes sense.
Makes sense, of course, because it's got a low profile. So when your hand comes back down,
you got it. So when you turn your waist and you throw it upwards and you try and catch it at the top, so you see that fully extended position that is in my profile picture, and you see in a lot of the Nanquan routines. Now, in combat, that doesn't make sense. Like, why would you hold your arm like all the way up there? What you're actually is you're training the movement chain, kind of posterior chain of throwing the weight all the way from behind the back, all the way to over the head. And then at the top, you're squeezing the weight, gripping your wrist. So it's strengthening the wrist. It's stretching the shoulder and the side of the body, and it's developing the kind of connection between the stance and the waist and the arm.
Yeah.
So it's like an exaggerated movement that's designed to be done as a sort of form of weight training, basically.
Yeah, but that's in a lot of Chinese martial arts where you train the movement to its full range and you apply it with a smaller range. So
Well, they say it's easy to go if you have the extension, it's easy to bring it in for fighting, but not vice versa. If you train the movements very small, just like in the Tai, that's it. You can if you can open, you can close, but if you close, you can't necessarily open. Same way in the Taiji, they'll often start with the large frame for health as well, for opening the channels, for relaxing and getting the mobility. And then in combat, it may be larger, it may be smaller. Some people say, oh, big is for health, small is for combat. I wouldn't agree with that necessarily. In combat, you have to follow the opponent. So if someone attacks you, I don't know, let's say you look at a Western fencing match with foils, then they're very small circle. The parry, riposte, the movement is very, very small. If someone attacks you with an axe or something, you can't use that.
Yes.
You have to step. So large circle has to be defended with large circle. You can't stand there and say, "Oh, I'll use my small 1-inch movement against a massive sort of swing of a heavy weapon or
the
Muay Thai."
situation will dictate the range of motion. So
Exactly that. So you don't try to make it fit your preconceptions, but if you've trained the entire range, you can adapt, right?
Exactly. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, but were there other? I mean, you mentioned Hungar before and then after, and before it was different. After it had assimilated some aspects, including the crane that you said. The tiger crane was mostly the ideas of the tiger and crane was also some concepts and methods taken from Shachuan. That's quite interesting because the name Hung doesn't necessarily refer to a specific style, and this is again a modern misunderstanding. It refers to Hongmen, which in the grand scheme of things is an underground society, and they were all over the place. And the specific martial arts practiced in the groups in Lingnan are what became Hungar today. It's not representative of all Hung. There might have been a lot of practices in other Hung societies in other areas that don't exist anymore because those societies just didn't carry on with it. But the one that did was Hung, and it kept the name and became Hungar. But as you mentioned, it's really important that people realize that over time it became crystallized into what we understand today.
I completely agree. Yeah, they used to call the village Hongkun. That's the ones that weren't sort of assimilated into the main lineages that are more known in the West. And obviously, because of famous Lam Sai Wing published books of his Sifu Wang Fei Hong, have become the kind of the most well-known branch. And so there are a lot of village styles that don't come through that lineage that have sets which look a little different. Have more of the sort of the shorter stance, the shorter bridge and the narrow stance. For example, my Sifu's great-great-grandfather had a set called Zhongdakun, which I've not seen in any of the other lineages, but that's a very kind of, it specializes in a sort of a chopping. So you do Xingyi, right? So the sort of Pi or the Petkun. So its main technique is a short chopping blow at the bridge and then a bouncing back into an uppercut. So it's like a very shortened.
Those are the two core methods of Shingyi: Qi rising, drilling, falling, and splitting.
So I bet there'd be a lot of. It'd be interesting if we could meet up one day and compare that. That might be really interesting to see. So that's my Sifu's great-grandfather's for, but that's still Hongar, but it's not in any of the kind of modern sort of post-Lam Sai Wing curriculum, but it's still in my Sifu family style. Is the Zhongdakun. So yeah, there are many branches. There's not like one Hongar. You're completely right. At one point, it was the most popular practiced in the south.
Until Chole Foot decided to deliberately create itself to counter a lot of the hard bridging methods of Hungar. So that's a really interesting issue as well. That is quite interesting when you look at the methods in Chole Foot, that it's designed to work against bridges. So yeah.
I'm not a historian, especially of other styles, so I don't like to say, but I really feel that the Chole Fat and the Hapgar must share. I mean, it's not in any of the official things, but when I see, okay, the step method is different in Hapgar, but many of the seed hand techniques of the Chole Fat are exactly the same. Now, the history, I mean, I don't want to anger any Chole Fat people, so I'm not speaking from a expert. I'm stepping outside of my expertise here, but Chole Fat meaning Buddha. I've read books saying that that's like Shaolin, as in Shaolin Buddhism, but I suspect there's also something Fatgakun, kind of Kung Fu in Guangzhou, which has the same hand techniques, the long chop choi, pao choi, cup choi. It's like, that would seem to me to be logical to think there's a connection there. Now, I don't have any evidence, but and the way that the idea, as you say, bypass the bridge as opposed to engage, like hit. Apart from the footwork, there's a huge similarity, like a huge overlap between Hap Kune and Toilet Fight. If you look at the sets, you don't know what, especially if you don't know what you're looking for with the lower body stuff, you're just looking at the hand techniques. Very, very similar. Very similar.
Interesting. I mean, that's your wheelhouse, but yeah, that's very interesting to hear. So yeah, but you know, I think if I'm not mistaken, sometimes Hopgar is also classified or called in the West Tibetan white crane.
Yeah, another can of worms, because after Wang Fei Hong, his students basically split into, there was three factions, if you like, or three different branches.
Yeah.
Well, again, there's even some argument about that. But let's say if you go back one more generation, Singlongjang, which is where Wang Lam learned in the Hengwanji, in the Hengwan Temple, he learned from Singlongjang. So there are three branches that come from Singlongjang, at least, and some say from Wang Fei Hong, which have become called by later generations Hapga, Bahot Pai, which is sometimes they call Tibetan white crane, and Lama Pai. And all those three have the same route, which is Singlongjang.
Yeah.
I actually visited, I sort of went to the temple where Hengwanji, where Singlongjang taught Wang Lam. I also visited Wang Lam's ancestral home. I was sort of trying to get to the roots of these things when I was in China just after the lockdown. It was like, okay, I want to go do a little bit of rooting around. I didn't find much. There wasn't any Gong Fu practice in the temple today, although the temple's still there. And I spoke to the Wang Lam's great-grandchildren, interestingly, so who have since become a disciple of my Sifu. So there's a connection there.
Oh,
Where was I? We're asking about the Bahot Pai.
Yeah.
One of the, again, I don't want to speak for other branches because we all have our own kind of stories and history and so on, but one of the branches called it Tibetan white crane, one called Hapgar in memory of their teacher who was Dai Hup, the big hero, and one used the term Lama Pai because Singlongjang came from outside of Guangzhou. Some say it was certainly way out west. Some say Qinghai village, which is the border of what is commonly or modern day Tibet. Although I think over the years it's been either on one side or the other of the border. So
Qinghai.
Some people call it Qinghai. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I mean they're definitely ethnically Tibetan grassland kind of people there. So yeah.
I'm unlike you. I mean, you've travelled all over in the north of China and so on. I really just concentrated on my my Sifu's bit in Guangzhou. So I can only really with authority speak for his style. But I mean, I'm interested in in where this has all come from. But I've not gone that area. That may be something for one day, another adventure.
Well, the interesting thing is that, like, martial-wise, you won't, if you go over to that area, you're not gonna find like kung fu systems. But
yeah,
in culturally and in the past, they were like all steppe grassland people wrestling. Wrestling was in the culture. The Tibetans lost that though, so it's very small groups that maintained it. And there's a couple of reasons. Some say that the Tibetans actually enjoyed horse riding and racing more than they enjoyed wrestling. So they maintained that, but they kind of started ignoring the wrestling. Because if like the three main things, archery, horse riding, and wrestling, they kind of let the wrestling go to the wayside. But yeah, and there's so many varieties of Mongol wrestling, like we see the standard Mongolian leather jacket wrestling today, but if you can still find it throughout Inner Mongolia, whether you're going into the desert areas or whether you're going into the grassland areas or closer to the woodland areas. Firstly, clothing can change a little bit. Some wear cloth jackets, some wear longer or different sleeves, some wear just the leather. But if there's some places that don't actually wear jackets, they wear different pants, and they have slightly different rules, like pinning is a thing that kind of, if you go into the Xinjiang areas there, they wrestle and pin. And if you look at some of the paintings from the Qing dynasty, specifically by a guy called Castiglione, his Chinese name is Lang Shening, he actually painted a gathering at the Muran, which is like the autumn hunt, that the bannermen and then the Mongol princes and the other grassland tribes would attend. No Han, by the way,
Hmm.
were attending. But you can see he painted some of the wrestling, and you can see the Shampuying and some of the Chinese wrestlers, which we call Shuaijiao today.
Yeah.
But if you look in the corner, you'll see two guys in what look like these weird nappy kind of pants, and the one guy's pushing the other guy's head down as he's pinning him. And that's that. That's that other type of wrestling, that
Familiar.
also
So
exists.
he was pinning him with his back to the floor, or his...
Back to the floor, and then you've got to press his head down, and if you hold it, something like that for X amount of time, you've won.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Because you see that kind of pinning in quite a lot of wrestling styles, but I've never seen it in China. So that's
Yeah.
Yeah,
So there's a lot
fascinating.
of variety, and that might be, you were mentioning some ideas of wrestling in close range. And,
Mhm.
maybe that's a bit of remnant that's still there, that came through
Yeah,
from the Qinghai area.
yeah, maybe so. I mean, we didn't used to wrestle with jackets on. It was, and then when my guys used to compete, we used to concentrate because of in the MMA format, we didn't wear jackets.
No gi, yeah.
I've never done a gi. I've never done gi sort of wrestling, but I did have a Taiji master from Beijing, Wang Yanti, who's like very good friend and very good instructor, and he was a medalist in the Shuijiao in Beijing.
Okay.
This was, I don't know what year this was actually. Elderly gentleman now, lives in Shanghai now, but one time I went to his house and I was studying Tai Chi with him, but he got the jackets out. He goes, "You want to put these on?" His push hands was phenomenal. And I was like, okay, I've never done jacketed wrestling, and I put it on, and like, my goodness, every time he got a grip, he got a throw. It was so quick because Fajing is one thing, but with the grabbing hold of a jacket and doing a Fajing, it's like I was it was very interesting for me. It's my very limited exposure to jacketed wrestling, but I quickly figured out that the most important thing become don't let him get a grip on the damn
Exactly.
thing.
So this is the thing for me with pushing hands. It's like, yeah, that's like
Like,
hand fighting at its very basic level. And what's hand fighting? It's about grips. And what do you want? You want to have him not have grips, and you have the grips you want, and then you're a for away if you get that. I mean, that's where the game starts.
that's
And
where
unfortunately, a lot of people, that's where the game ends and stays forever and ever. Amen. And I'm like, okay, you've got to progress from this. You can't just do that. So
Yes,
yeah.
well, Master Wang had this saying that the push hands was the mother of wrestling, because he had the idea that if you can unbalance somebody, you can throw them. But not unless you train to. Obviously, you can't just you practice every day unbalancing people, and then they step, and then you reset, you step, and you reset. So you have to have your timing down so that as they're off balance, you capitalize on it with a strike or a throw.
Yeah.
So by itself is not very. I mean, Japanese they call it kazushi. So they have a similar.
Kazushi.
Yeah, imbalancing, and that really is very similar to the pushing hands. But yeah, the thing about the grip fighting, I hadn't appreciated with the short sleeve jackets, how because you sort of let something go by the radar because your brain's not going. It's about like first time you get choked out in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class, you kind of by the time you're aware of it, it's too late, and then later on you go, okay, it's just a bad idea to let that hand get in that. So you sort of end up preempting it to some degree, which is where real martial arts works, right? The idea of like they always demonstrate it like the technique is almost on before you do your counter to show people, and that's really not how it works in the real world.
And you were mentioning about like initial off balancing and not going further from there. But
Yes.
I mean, just take for example the person that you're practicing your off balancing on.
Yeah.
While you might be getting better at off balancing over time, he's getting better at knowing how to not let you off balancing and how to recover. So when you meet somebody who knows those things, you're stuck if you haven't developed past that point. So yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. Of course, some styles say we'll strike first and then off balance in order to kind of distract or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But then you need other skills in order to do that, don't you? So everything depends on how on your practice methods. But
Totally.
It's a split second thing. So I mean, the beautiful thing about pushing hands is you're not getting thrown on the ground. You can practice it when you're older.
Yeah.
You can sensitivity. It's sociable. It's nice. Nobody wants to get busted up from martial art practice, especially when you're older. So it has a lot of advantages, but yeah, by itself, it's missing some key elements that make it combative. And contrary, there's a lot of people in the modern combat world that learn all these techniques, but they're missing the subtlety and the sophistication of how to set them up, how to make them work. You end up
Very
just with
true.
collection of movements without really understanding the deeper
And also,
content.
you can use that subtlety to further enhance and refine your body mechanics, basically what we call shinfa, which will then make all your techniques a lot better, which make your motion more efficient and help you to generate a more integrated whole body power, etc., etc. All of these things have value as long as you know what to do, how to do them, and to do them correctly. So, available now from the Mushin Martial Culture website is the Shingyi Notebook. The Shingyi Notebook is the perfect tool to assist you to maximize your learning capability and to help you monitor your progress effectively as you navigate your path while studying Shingyi Tren and the martial arts in general. With a specifically designed framework, the notebook serves both as a concrete record of your learning as well as a guide which will orient you on your path towards mastery. The notebook features a page to catalog session information as well as to take notes during a training session, as well as a post-training reflection page which features a series of questions and metrics that will promote productive introspection and reflection on each session. Order yours today from mushinmartialculture.com.
I think what you've just described is like really the beauty of Chinese martial arts. That's what we have. That people say like, "What? Why Chinese martial arts?" It's really that. It's like that's what seems. I'm not saying the other systems don't have it, but it seems not to be so developed. That's such a important thing. And then if you can control your body in that way and your mind intent leading your movement and the connection between the waist and the step and so on, it just translates to everything.
Yes, totally agree.
It may not be kind of sexy when you see people practicing it in the park. It's people like, what's that about? But once you've done it, you appreciate the value of it, and also how it increases the longevity of your practice as well. So I think as the martial arts progress, I think you'll probably see more of that coming into the mainstream. It will come around full circle, I think, again.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I hope people can, you'll get people that have experience with somebody, like they're not from a Chinese martial arts background, and then they have some experience with a guy who cross-trains, and then they're like, well, how are you moving like this? And you're like, oh,
yeah,
well, it's because of this. And they identify the value in it, and then they start trying to develop that too. So
yeah, and then give it a few thousand years and they'll end up with Kung Fu.
Yeah, unless the robots kill us first, which is probably more likely.
It might, right? Yeah, all the Shenfa in the world isn't going to help then, is it? And
No.
all the unbalancing practice against a machine might not transfer.
Yeah, no, he's gonna watch all the martial arts instructional videos in existence in about 3.2 milliseconds and have digested everything and know exactly what's cooking, so we're screwed.
And there'll be no telegraphing of his attack.
No. He might email it to you first, though. No, I'm kidding.
Very good.
Yeah. So your teacher, if I may ask, how old is he now?
80. He's 80 now.
Yeah, he's very, very close to my teacher's age. So is he still active?
He's very active. He's developed, because he's a creative individual, and he's developed what he calls the new frame hapga, which is more kind of based on the minnoi jump, the needling cotton practice. In other words, as he's got older, he's removed the sort of harder aspects and especially like some of the low stances and jumps and so on, and he's made it very much sort of, for want of a better word, internal forms. By that I mean, using mind intent rather than using too much athleticism, so to speak. He's really about refining it. So he's developed 3 sets, which when he actually came, he spent a few months in the UK. He was living at my house. This was back in, when was this? 2002, 2003, and he was already kind of working it then. He had a notebook and he was always writing down, practicing, writing down, refining. And then I've got some video of him on my YouTube channel, like doing it in the park. And so it took it over 20 years, and he ended up with these 3 sort of condensed forms. It's 108. There's 3 sets of 36 movements, which he calls the cotton fist, cotton palm, and the 8-change palm. And the cotton fist is kind of closest to the hapga but it's done in a soft way. So it's kind of inspired by Sulohorn set, but it's done in a more relaxed way. And there's some fajing, but it's mostly kind of in a Taiji kind of flavor. And then the cotton palm is all of the would you call, like, similar to the push hands and the chin na, we call kamla, the seizing techniques. And then the back the Bab Bin Dung is interesting because that's a hand form that you can then pick up weapons. So it's kind of, it's hands, but it's sword, it's fan, it's spear, it's stick, it's umbrella, it's whatever you want to make it.
Very
But
cool.
it's all of the movement patterns and stepping used in. So the first half of the set is, if it's a light weapon, something like a gim or a fan. The second half of the set, if it's a heavy weapon, something like a pole or a broadsword or something like, or double swords. And so it's like an adaptive set. So that's his three. He calls that his needling cotton set, his needling cotton system, I should say. Needling cotton is a term from Wong Yan Lum. He used to say, you can practice your sets very soft, just using your mind intent, where the strength is like a needle wrapped in cotton wool. And like the White Crane School, for example, developed their own Midnight Jump set. This is not connected to that, but it's conceptually the same. This is my Sifu's own sort of development. So that's what he's doing at the moment. He's still teaching that in the parks in the mornings, and he's doing workshops and things like that, instructors training. So he's still very active and
Very
still
good.
developing, still evolving, which is amazing to see when you can see that he's still refining stuff. That, you know, he's 80 now and he started training when he basically as soon as he could walk. So it's funny to me to see that. Yeah.
That's one of the other benefits of Chinese martial arts is that, especially as we get older, it's the training, apart from the physical side of doing some movement physically, it keeps your brain active and younger in a way that other old people don't have. So that plus the community aspect, which is it's very important in Chinese martial arts. Training with people, training publicly, teaching these things, it keeps old people from becoming old and withering away, you know? I mean, and that's really important, you know? So people are so... Martial arts should be practical and functional, don't get me wrong, but you can't just think about that only. You should definitely think about that as the core, but you should also have all the periphery ideas that you can understand the big picture of what you're doing as a lifestyle, lifelong, life-encompassing practice, not a hammer to break or hit a nail, and if there's no more nails to hit, you don't need the hammer or to swing it anymore. You know, the hammer should be made of metal. You should swing it correctly to be able to hit the nail. But you could also keep swinging that hammer for the rest of your life, even if there are no nails to hit down, to keep yourself happy, physically healthy, mentally active, etc. So
I couldn't agree more. And as you train and you go through life, your ideas should evolve. You should change. I mean, if you're thinking exactly the same as when you're 80 as when you're 20, then something's wrong, I think. So I think it's appropriate that people's expression of martial art changes as they get older, but it's still there. I mean, it's like writing a research paper or something for a thesis. You have your research phase where you should study wide, you should look at everything, you should try and understand it, and then you have your sort of refinement stage where you're kind of cutting. You want to end up with a concise. So like my Sifu's ended up with just like 3 short sets, even though in his life he studied so many styles, so many things. It's like research. And then the idea being that what you end up with is small, but it encompasses, it has its depth. It has, you've assimilated all the other stuff and you've put them into a very compact and sort of minimalistic practice, but it would literally take decades to unpack if you really wanted to understand it. So I see that as, I guess I would aspire to being like that when I'm 80 would be really something. He's still, even when we practice, occasionally he still turns it on. He puts on his old fighting mode and his posture changes and his expression, and so, the hairs on the back of my neck still stand up. I'm like, damn, the old guy's still got it. Turns it on. He can still turn it on. Just the difference was he reserves it. Yeah, it's more for him. It's not keep fit. It's health preservation. Young son. It's like, it's not about developing he's got that. He's got the kung fu. Now it's just keeping it. It's just preserving it.
I agree.
Different mentality.
Yeah,
he is amazing.
Would you say, and again, I mean, I want to hear your thoughts on the conclusion and then his work to condense into, or to rather create 3 sets that are rich in his experience and understanding. But you've obviously learned them, right? Those 3 sets.
Yeah.
But you're not going to forego the process of learning everything else in lieu of these 3 sets. Yeah?
No,
Am I correct in saying that?
you're absolutely correct. I don't think, how shall I put it? He might not say it this way, but that's his expression, his lifetime study. You know, copy that. You can learn those sets, but you won't get what he's got, and because you haven't been through what he's been through, you haven't gone through the process. Yeah. So I think what you're looking at is, but you're looking at it as a kind of an example. I look at it as an example and say, wow, you know, when he does this movement, it's so bizarre that you can say, oh, for Qigong, it's like this. Your intention goes here, you relax here, you breathe here. And then he'll say, oh, for street fighting, this is like this lock, this grabs here, this grabs this point, whatever. And then he'll say, oh, for combat sport, you need to adapt this because blah, blah, blah. And he can take one movement and just expand on it, and you think, wow. And yeah, just learning the sets and copying the movement wouldn't even scratch the surface of it. No. Yeah. So I know I don't think he's claiming, or I certainly wouldn't claim, oh, if you learn these 3 sets, you can forego all this kind of. This is the epitome of a lifetime of study. Yes, but it's his time of study, you know.
But isn't that misunderstood? Because I mean, my teacher has also compiled as he's older, and compiled and combined and created some types of essences of his other practices, and he's come to his conclusions at this point in his life. And like you said, I mean, he was here because he's been in Australia since the lockdown began, because his daughter lives there since COVID. He was stuck there. He came back this year for a couple of months, and I haven't seen him in person since the lockdown because of this, and since COVID began. But you know, he's obviously old. I mean, he's getting close to 80 as well. And, and he moves in a much, like when I started training with him, it was hard, right? So it was like this hard ass, right? So now he's a lot more soft. He's got it, but he's not using it all the time, as you mentioned. But the same thing.
Similar, yeah.
When he turns it on and he does like one movement where everything's going, you're like, oh, geez, yeah, no, he can still break you in half if he feels like it.
Got it. My secret, though, is like if you keep doing it all the time, hard, like when you're 30, you take too long to recover between training sessions, you'll get older, it's not good for your health. So you need to find the right balance. So you want to preserve it. You still want to be able to issue power. Everything has to be connected. The structure has to be strong, but you're conserving your energy to a degree. But I don't think it's appropriate for us. I don't know how old you are, but for me, I'm in my 50s, not 80. So I'm not doing it the same as when I was 20, but I don't want to be doing it exactly like my Sifu's doing it, because that's, you know, I'm not 80. So it's
I'm 45 and I can already feel different from...
Okay.
To be honest, I must say that over the last 2 or 3 years, I've felt the biggest change in my physical state compared to the previous 40 odd years of my life. I could actually feel, okay, there's something slightly different now, and things need to change a little bit because of that. A little bit, you know. Yeah. So. Yeah,
and that's quite right. And it unfortunately it does accelerate. I mean, I felt until I was 50, I was still like going to. I mean, I'm not a competitive fighter, so don't get me wrong on that. But I would. Happy to go to like a MMA camp in Thailand or something like that and spar with the professional fighters, like on a, you know, appropriate level of intensity for my age or etc. I would still spar and grapple and kick pads and stuff right up to 50, and I never felt like, you know, maybe my cardio wasn't what it was, but you know, I could still do it. And then like after 50, and now I'm thinking 55 now. I was like, yeah, it's not quite the same. Not quite the same. I'm gonna have to go with my Sifu, but I don't think it would be right to just say, all right, I'm just going to now go to where he is now. No. Because then you're missing that other 25 years.
So that's what I was getting at. I mean, people learn, or they see a teacher has this end of life thing that he's doing, right? And they think, okay, I just got to do that, and that's everything in it. Meanwhile, they haven't gone through everything else, and they haven't walked their own path. They haven't digested all. He got there because he walked all of that. You got to walk that path yourself. You can learn it by all means, but in the end, you might come to a slightly different conclusion. But secondly, you haven't had that physical experience that he has getting to that point. So,
or to come to a conclusion, because you're different. I mean, if it's Eastern or Westerner, there's slightly different temperament, slightly different body mechanic, or not body mechanics, but body size. My Sifu is like 5 foot tall, 5'1". He's much smaller than me. So, like for example, if he's doing some of the movement. Let's say the Taiji part horse's mane, for example. He can't even like get his arm high enough to kind of tip
Under your
someone over.
armpit.
Yeah, he can't do it. He can't even reach it. So, but he's adapted the movement. So he still uses the movement, but he does it as a kind of a strike across the neck and still do it very effectively. But it's like, be appropriate for me to use it like he uses it, because I'm not the same. I'm not the same. I'm not built the same.
But you're supposed to come to your own conclusion, you know?
Anyone that's got kids knows, you know, you want to protect, you want to say to them, look, guys, I can shortcut you decades of pain here. Just listen to me. I've figured it out, blah, blah, blah. They're not going to listen. They got to figure it out for themselves. You can't give them that wisdom. You can't do it.
True.
They have to live their life. They have to learn the hard way. And I think Kung Fu is the same. You can't tell your students, I'm going to shortcut you 20 years and just go straight to this. I don't think it works that way. I don't think it. Everyone has to figure it out for themselves. But of course, if you have a good method and a good teacher, that's massive advantage. But it's not instead of your own experience.
Yeah, you know, in Shingyi Chuan we have 12 animals. You know, there's like, and I remember very early my teacher telling me, my Chinese name is Wei Long. He's like, Wei Long, when you've gone through these animals, take time and, you know, develop them, and then the ones that sing to you most are the ones that you should then focus more on, you know, and make them your own. And I was like,
right.
Yeah, so which ones are your favorite? I remember asking him this, and it was like, wait. I said, because I should focus on those. He said, no, everybody's different. Our bodies are different. Our temperament is different. Our minds are different. You've got to find the one that's suited to you. I'll teach you them all, obviously, as we always do in the system. But then you've got to focus on, and it could be completely different between him and me and my Kung Fu brothers, and you know, each one of us are very different. So it's the same thing.
Sounds like a great method. You have the system, but then you have to let the individual find their way within that. Yeah. Sounds like a good teacher. So, but your name Long, as in dragon.
Yeah,
so,
Wei Long, Wei. Yeah.
I don't know Xingyi Chuan, but the dragon isn't one of the 12, right?
It is. It's the first one you learn.
The first one you learn, okay. Yeah. So I know there was this kind of I've never studied Xingyi Chuan, but I've seen some of the sets. It looks awesome, but that's the first one. So is that did that turn out to be your name was your spirit animal, or was that not?
No, actually, I'm of Greek descent. So my name Byron, my name in Greek is Viron.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds like Weilong, so that's how that came around.
Okay, yeah.
So that's why my name. It just happened to have the word dragon in it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I'm more of a fan of tigers, but you know, it is what it is.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah. So how did you get into Taiji? You said you met your Taiji teacher in Shanghai, or you were studying with him.
My main Taiji teacher is my Sifu, though, because his father was he studied Yang style with Yang Xiaochong, because Yang Xiaochong came down south. He was in Canton, and he also studied the contemporary Taiji with Li Dian's uncle, Li Tianji, Lei Ting-Kei, we call it Cantonese, So he was very close to my Sifu. He was actually the first person in Guangdong to teach the 24 forms, because I think it was 1956 they picked a couple of masters from each province to kind of spread the contemporary Taiji. So my Sifu's father was one of two from Guangdong province. So so my Sifu is very, very aware of the Taiji, both the traditional, he's done Yang style, Chen style. He can do all the classical routines, and also the simplified for the beginners routines as well. So I'd learned that from him, and then I through a mutual friend in the BCCMA, I met Master Wang, who was very good at push hands, and he kind of shared some stuff for me. Or not an official student. That was just a good friend and cross-trained with him. My main teacher in Taiji is the same, it turns out. I also studied before I met my Sifu, I'd done some Taiji as well. I did some Wu style and some Yang style.
Oh, you mentioned that,
Yeah, so that was before I met my Sifu. So if you look on my website, I've got like the the family tree and how that kind of worked. But my Sifu's dad basically had 3 systems, which was Taiji, Hap Kune. So his kind of calligraphy on his sort of family tree, if you like, Hong Hap Tai Gik, so Honga Hap Ga Taiji.
Okay.
So there's 3 systems within the family. So, but yeah, that was how I got into that.
You know, Li Tianji's primary system was Xingyi.
Xingyi, yes,
Yeah.
because
So.
Master Wang that I trained with that showed me. He was the fellow I said about the wrestler.
Ah.
He has some
Okay.
interesting stories. He was in Beijing after the Cultural Revolution. His parents were one was a opera singer and one was a composer, and they both disappeared. And he was left with his sister in a house in a cold winter with sort of no fuel or whatever. And some of the local wrestlers said, "We want to use your garden to practice wrestling, and if you don't let us, we're going to smash your windows." That was what happened. It's like, okay, if you smash my
Sound like Beijing wrestlers. That sounds like
yeah.
Beijing wrestlers.
So he said, if you smash my windows, we're probably going to freeze to death. It was that level. It was
Yeah.
at times. And he was looking after his sister and he was like, okay. So then they said, and you're going to let us throw you. You're going to be our throwing dummy. So I don't know if he said there was like 4 or 5 of them and they come every day, every afternoon and throw him. And one would throw him till he got tired and then the other one would throw him and then the other one. And then they go back to the first one again. And he goes, so, they were practicing throwing on him. And it's very similar to what you were saying about the unbalancing. He said that after a few months of this, he said, they were throwing me for an hour a day, but I was being thrown for several hours a day. And he goes, and I got very, very good at not being thrown.
Yeah.
So that was his kind of interest. And then after a while, they kind of accepted him as like, hey, this guy's pretty good. And then they started to teach him. And he was actually practicing Xingyi Chuan in the park. I know he was doing one technique, I don't know, Pichuan or one of the basic ones, in front of this tree, and he was just repeating the movement. And Li Tianzhe was in the park with some of his students and kind of watched him, and he was like, he's practiced this one technique for like hours and just one move. He seems like a serious guy. And he actually asked him, Li Tianzhe asked Master Wang, would you like to be my disciple? And he said yes. He ended up becoming known at the school as Mr. Push Hands because he was like the sort of top guy for push hands. Having done all the wrestling, obviously his balance was really good and so on. He ended up competing. So that's, I met him at a sort of he was giving seminars and workshops in push hands and we become friends. But again, not an official student. I'm not in his sort of lineage or anything. I never studied Xingyi. Just did some exchange some stuff with him, but amazing guy. I mean, phenomenally concert level violinist, multiple languages, got degrees in psychology, very, very good meditation, qigong, fighting, one of the real sort of Renaissance men of really, really inspiring gentleman.
That's really interesting to hear. Did his parents ever show up again?
No.
That's sad.
No.
Who knows what happened there? Those crazy times, a multitude of things could have happened. So
He
who
learned
knows what happened?
arts then purely as a self-defense. There wasn't any as a kid. It was to look after himself and his sister. He wasn't thinking about spiritual cultivation or anything of the sort when he first started. Obviously, he got older. That was where his interest went. But he was very much practical. It was about survival.
So your Taiji, I mean, also 24. Li Tianji was one of the compilers of the main compiler of the 24.
Yeah, and the 32 sword.
Yeah, and
yeah.
I mean, my teacher knew him very well as well. I mean, he was directly there's a whole history there that I don't want to talk about here, but he's got connections and there's a history with the Sun family of Sun Tang. But yeah, I remember it was probably 4 years ago. I was at this lunch thing, and I was sitting at a table with Li Deyin. Li Deyin's his nephew, and
yes,
he created the 42, right? So
that's correct. Yep.
And I remember sitting there talking to Li Deyin, and I'd met Li Deyin before, but not had a chance to talk to him a lot. And this day we were sitting next to each other, and I said to him, Lao She teacher, what? I want to ask you something about your compiling of the 42. He said, yes. I said, you compiled 4 of the 5 styles basically in there. He said, yes. I said, okay. I asked him, why did you put a Xingyi Quan movement in there from Zashi Chui? And he just looked at me and he's like, you're the first person that's asked me that. You know that.
Most people
don't. Yeah. So we had a really good conversation about that. I was like, it's so out of place because I mean, I know it's Xingyi and it's just awkward from a Taiji point of view. And even the way it's done there from a Xingyi point of view is a little bit awkward. But he's like, the regulations at the time required that we have a xiebu, which is that cross-legged kind of squatting
I was about
stance.
to say, I was about to say, I said, I bet he was going to say it was because of the resting step. I
Yeah.
was thinking, because I've seen how they compile. It must have a certain number of stances, certain number of kicking techniques. And that
Yeah.
was that. My conclusion, having practiced the 42, I thought that's probably why that's in there. That's the
That
one
is why it's in
the,
there.
the, the Wu style snake creeps down that follows it, which
Yeah,
is
so basically it's called Lan Long Wo Dao in Xingyi Quan. Lan Long means lazy dragon and Wo
yeah,
Dao means lies in the road, basically. So
gotcha.
that's that kind of where you insert that fist as you
Yeah.
step into that like empty kind of cross-legged stance. That's that. Are you interested in learning authentic traditional Chinese martial arts of Xingyi Quan and Baguazhang? Well, if that's the case, the Huajin Online Learning Program is for you. The Huajin Online Learning Program is the premier distance learning program where you can learn authentic arts of Hebei Xingyi Quan and Liang style Baguazhang in a comprehensive and in-depth manner from wherever you are. Featuring over 120 in-depth lessons covering aspects of individual training, technique refinement, forms, application, partner work, conditioning, internal skill building and qigong, and much more. The Huajin Online Learning Program has been running successfully for over 3 years and is highly praised by participants within the program. So start your journey into learning authentic classical Chinese martial arts today by visiting mushinmartialculture.com to find out more or to sign up directly at patreon.com/mushinmartialculture. That is the Huajin Online Learning Program. Enroll today.
So you're
So
you're sort of stomping down presumably to somebody's knee, and then you're punching with your right hand over the top of
yeah,
your
and
left.
then the bottom hand has got a grip on either a
That,
hand or something as you pull him, take him down, and punch him. Basically,
that's it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's from Xingyi Chuan, yeah.
yeah, that's from Zasha Trey, a pretty widespread traditional routine. So
Okay.
yeah. So it was good to get closure on that after so many years. I wanted to hear it
Thanks,
from the
thanks.
proverbial horse's mouth.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I met him. His daughter's actually teaches in the UK. So
That's right, Faye,
yeah,
right?
that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
But she did some seminars. Got her father over back in the day. I attended some seminars. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
a
I
good friend of mine. He's an old hat from the BCCMA, and I worked together with him for so many years.
okay.
His name is Peter War, and he studied with Li Tianji and Li Deyin and them. He did their Xingyi Quan as well. So yeah,
Yeah, he was the chairman of the BCCMA when I was, or was the chairman or the president when I was involved. So I met him many times. Yeah,
yeah.
he was just up the road from me actually. His school was not far from my school.
Yeah,
Sort of the
he's
next.
up in Milton Keynes.
That's right. Which was 20 minutes from Bedford, which is where my school was. So yeah.
You mentioned earlier that it was the lockdown that made you move. Was it because they stopped you from being able to teach?
This was an interesting thing that at that time I was actually ready to. My school was. It got to the point where it was kind of large. I had full-time staff. It was getting a little bit stressful. We were teaching a lot of classes, and my kids sort of finished university, and I was sort of ready for something different. And I thought, I'm going to go back to China as a student again, just sort of go back round full circle, and just that was my idea. And I'd closed my school, with the idea being that, it was after 25 years of doing this full time. I thought, I'm just going to go to China and just stay with my sifu, near my sifu, and just see what happens.
Yeah.
And I just sold the school. I lived on a narrow boat for several years, and I'd sold the boat, sold the school. So I was kind of ready. I was ready to go, and then COVID happened. So in one sense, it was good because at least I wasn't trying to run a business, like a full-time big business, and trying to manage a team of people when we couldn't teach classes. I'd already wound that down. But at the same time, but then I was like, well, I can't go to China now. as it was all closed. And I was teaching some online students, so I thought, well, I can be teaching online from anywhere. I don't need to be in Bedford. And I liked this area where I am now, which is near Cardiff. And there's like a seaside, and there's like some lakes, and I could do my practice in the park. And it was a nice area. And I thought, well, I'll go kind of until China opens. Of course, it turned out to be almost 3 years. Yeah. I couldn't just keep teaching online for 3 years. I had to do face-to-face again. So I found a place near where I live now 2 years ago now, and opened up a school. And then when China sort of reopened, I spent the summer in China and closed the school for like the summer break and went back to China. So that's why
last year?
That was, let me think, was that last summer? It was last summer. Not the summer just gone, the one before that.
Yeah, 2023.
Basically, as soon as it opened, I was like, okay, I can go back. So 2023, that's correct. Yeah, so I was in Guangzhou that summer. But as we spoke about before, it changed a lot. The atmosphere was very different. And so I come back here. And I'm just running a small school. I'm basically doing what I've always done, which is teaching Hap Kune, teaching Tai Chi. But I'm just doing it on a smaller scale. And
you're happy. You've got time for yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's the main thing. I have my garden. I have the lake across the way. I can practice, and I've really gone much more into practicing stuff that over the years I've had very little time for, because when you're teaching classes all the time, it's focusing on the students. So a little bit more selfish that I'm focusing on some stuff for me and working on some of my own kung fu again more deeply. I felt those 3 years I actually made some good progress. So it was worth it.
Good. Very good. I recall that you studied with Braulio Estima, right?
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What led you down that path?
Well, I was interested in mixed martial arts from the beginning, really, watching it evolve. And we used to do the sort of sandar type sparring, punch, kick. I liked the MMA because of the small gloves and having the seizing techniques. I thought this is pretty cool. But it was clear that the ground aspect was, not known to me, or not. They have a different approach anyway in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I believe, is that right? You've cross-trained BJJ, is that?
I still practice. I'm a brown belt.
Oh, that's terrific. So I never did the gi. The reason I trained with Braulio is because I basically said to him initially, I said, well, this is what we're doing. I have this idea of doing amateur MMA, and I'd like to learn, basically fill in the gaps, there's the ground stuff that I'm not familiar with. So he said, okay, so we do no gi, and we'll start, from the beginning. This was 2004. I think it was 2004. Braulio wasn't that well known at the time. He just opened up a school in the UK. And it was, it wasn't even his school. He rented a space in the sort of bodybuilding gym at the back. It was quite interesting because all the bodybuilders would look and think, that doesn't look very effective, and try to challenge him, and he'd be like tapping them out and choking them out left, right and centre.
The usual.
He's phenomenal. He's just so incredible. What a gifted athlete, and also a great teacher. He's very kind of conceptual in his teaching. Based, and I found a lot of similarity, funny enough, between him and the Taiji masters that I train with, in terms of emphasis on relaxation, flow, not being rigid, but using weights, using gravity. I thought he's phenomenally good. But I never studied BJJ in the sense of having a gi and belts and that kind of thing. It was just I took private lessons with him for several years, and basically took what I got from him and integrated it into my MMA curriculum. So it was only the part of it that was relevant for what we wanted at the time. I actually would like to, at some point, go back to it, studying it as a system in its own right, because I'm sure there are things like the grip training which I bypassed because we don't wear gis in MMA. So it was all about efficiency. It was about let's take the bits that kind of work from us, but principle based. Anyway, Braulio, that time when he was sort of top of the world and winning everything, I was very fortunate that was the time I was having privates with him, and and then taking the classes after. He had like the no-gi class, and a lot of the guys in that class were high-level competitive fighters, so I got to spar with them. So I got to kind of try my stuff against really, really good people.
Yeah.
That was a terrific, it exposes everything, where it's not quite right, where it's not quite tight, where it's like, yeah, you have to fix that. And then going from there to sort of, rolling with regular folks, it's like, it feels much, much easier, much, much different. Yeah. So, I did that for, I think 6 or 7 years I was training with him. He got to the point where he was really traveling a lot. And, but I used to drive there every week from UK to Birmingham, take a private and then do a class. Yeah.
Is he still there?
He still has a school in Birmingham, but he's rarely there. He works now for Gracie Barra. He's like their head coach, so he's always in some country or another. He's like rarely in the UK. Yeah, he's just traveling, teaching seminars. But in the old days, he used to teach seminars at my school, and we were super fortunate at that time. Again, it was right place, right time. He was new to the country. People didn't really know what Jiu-Jitsu was at that time, and I was lucky to have been on.
Very good.
Be able to take private lessons with him, and there's no way now he just wouldn't be around, and he's always super busy and but at that time, it was great.
Did you learn his famous lock?
The Estima lock.
Yeah.
I think that's more like it. I think him and his brother kind of come up with that. That was kind of lately. That was the foot lock you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, at the time I was training with him, he was more known for his inverted triangle choke. That was his thing. That was the one he won the sort of ADCCs with, and that was his sort of major. So we worked on that. The Estima lock came a little later, I think.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I from the beginning, and it's a very similar situation with me. I was like, that whole world on the floor when we're horizontal, I had no idea, and I was like, I think that's a hole I need to fill. So it's been 10 years, and I haven't stopped. So I still go to. So when I go to Jiu-Jitsu, I spend about 5 hours there because I'll do a gi class and a no gi class back to back. I've always done gi and no gi at the same time. So I'm a bit jealous because I haven't done that for a few years now, and certainly since COVID, and I miss it. And I think I really quite like to get back into. There is a jiu-jitsu school somewhere not that far from here, and I keep meaning to kind of get back into that. So yeah, why not? Why not? Just do it at your own pace. Just do it at your own pace. Yeah.
No, so that's excellent. Same feeling exactly like when I first. So there's some interesting distinctions between what the Chinese call ground fighting and then what the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu do, which is sort of I don't know. Would you make the distinction ground grappling to ground fighting? I don't know, but I'd certainly learned from my Sifu break falls, standing up from the ground, like kicks from the floor, like up kicks, scissor sweeps, some sort of basic getting the person off of you from on top. So even my Sifu, even way back in the day before there was such a thing as MMA. Emphasize. I know I've heard people say tek da sutla, right? Kick, strike, wrestle, and seize. My Sifu used to say, he used to say tek da sutla dit. He had five elements and
break falling.
It was the ground. So it wasn't just break falling. It was also sweeps, trips, reversals, escapes. So it was like, okay, he had even back then before there was such a thing as an MMA. He said, if you want self-defense, you need 5 elements, all 5 of these. So, but how should I put it? I think in the Brazilian way, it's a bit more sophisticated because they have a whole map. And as you know, if you're a brown belt, then you know extremely well that you have these kind of micro battles, don't you? So it's a battle passing a guard, then a battle for isolating a limb, and then the kind of the final submission or whatever is like the last piece of the puzzle. Whereas the Chinese seem to go like from 0 to 100, so it would be like one shot. If the guy wasn't skillful, it would work. If the guy was skillful,
exactly what I was about to say. That works against people who don't know what's going on.
That's it. And if the guy's skillful, you're back to square one again. Whereas with kind of Bracio's method, it's more like climbing a mountain. You make a little step and you secure it. You put your little peg in the wall and you tie off, and then you look for the next one. So that you're making these kind of little steps, and because you have the map in your mind, you know where to go, where not to go. So you can make that kind of I don't know, from the Chinese martial art, I accept if you're on a battlefield or something and you're rolling on the ground for an extended period, you're probably going to get speared or someone's going to kick you in the head or whatever.
Yeah, people don't know that like weapons were the primary go-to for Chinese martial arts up until the early 1900s even. So,
Right.
the idea that you're gonna develop a heavy unarmed system on the floor is it's not
Like,
realistic in that
I'm
environment
like,
because they're
exactly,
gonna stick you with something. That's what's
environment.
gonna, yeah.
Even his grandfather's day, the standard for the challenge fights was stick.
Yeah,
It,
exactly.
it was considered like a big step when they took the spearhead off the end. It was like, never mind just rolling on the ground and not punching each other. That's a whole different thing. But having said that, like everything, it's what enables you to go very deeply and evolve, and it's a beautiful art in its own right. I think
Yeah.
that Jiu-Jitsu is beautiful, but it's not my kind of primary or plan A, so to speak. But
No.
it's very useful. It's a very useful backup. And if you're doing MMA, of course you're going to end up on the ground at some point. And it's unlikely you're going to get your knockout before the guy grabs a hold of you. So having that as a kind of a part of a system or part of an integrated, I used to call what I taught integrated martial arts rather than mixed martial arts. And the reason for that was that I felt, and I think it's becoming more mainstream now, but at the time I was teaching it, all of the other schools they were teaching MMA would be like, oh, you do your jiu-jitsu on a Monday, you do your wrestling on a Tuesday,
Yeah.
all this kind of thing. And that was considered the way to learn it. And after you've got 3 years of this and 3 years of that, then you can put them together. And I just knew from the beginning that that wasn't right. I was like, it doesn't make sense. If you want to learn rugby, you don't do 3 years of soccer to learn to kick, 3 years of basketball to learn how to throw, and then put them together. You play rugby.
And then track and field to learn how to run.
That's it, yeah. Yeah, so I knew from the beginning that wasn't, and also looking at statistics, because somebody published a book, I don't know if you heard it, it's a book called Fightnomics, and I think it was predominantly for bookkeepers and people that are doing, betting companies, and it had all, like, this is the most high percentage takedown, locks, strikes, looking at the figures, because they compiled every single, like, UFC and all of the top MMA, like, there was thousands and thousands of fights of data in this. And interesting, even though you could say, oh, this, for example, is the most common choke, or rear naked choke, and you'd say, okay, but some of the ones weren't the same from the sports they come from. By that I mean the most common jiu-jitsu moves in MMA weren't the same as the most common jiu-jitsu moves in a pure jiu-jitsu match, if that makes sense.
Right.
Perspective of, okay, if your goal is to train amateur MMA guys, which was my goal, I had no pretensions to being a jiu-jitsu champ or anything like that. I just wanted to say, can you take a regular guy who's never fought in his life and in a reasonable time frame, get him in a cage? And how would you do that? And it didn't make sense for me to get him to put on a gi for 3 years. It just wasn't, that's not where we were going. So I was integrated from day one, but with a very, very heavy emphasis on fundamentals. Because people say, oh, if you're integrating, you're losing the basics. And my argument was, well, no, because the basics are different. The basics are different. You need to shoot with an eye to the guy hitting you, or you need to,
I've had it a million times where a guy, I mean, even up to purple belt, like trying to shoot a double leg on me by opening his arms, and I would knee them in the face, but very lightly.
Of course you would.
I'm like, what kind of dumb habits are you developing?
Dumb habits. Exactly.
Yeah.
Where if you do the opposite way around, you start with the full picture, then at least you're creating the right habits for the environment you want to eventually train for. I mean, I know in jiu-jitsu they say, oh, no footlocks before purple belt or something like that. So how are you developing the reflex to defend it? How you could end up developing a game which you then have to completely change.
So my first teacher was a Pedro Sauer Hickson Gracie black belt.
Awesome.
So it was a different mentality. My first day of no gi, he brought out MMA gloves. And he told the guy in my guard to put them on. And then he looked at me and said, don't let him hit you and make your jiu-jitsu work. And I was like, okay, all right.
There you go.
Well, I did get hit quite a bit. So...
Yeah, you get hit, but that's how you get better, right? I mean, it's like, what's the Dog Brothers say, higher consciousness through harder contact. I mean, you don't want to lose all your brain cells, but at the same time, there's no better way to learn.
If you enjoy the Drunken Boxing podcast as well as all the other Mushin martial culture endeavors, please do support us if you can at patreon.com. We have 2 support tiers there that you can pledge to help us continue to do the work that we do and continue to bring you the podcast as well as all our other works. If you would like to make a once-off tip or donation to our endeavors, please visit the link listed in the show notes or scan the QR code here. Thank you to everyone who supports us.
I went to Hawaii, and I don't know if have you heard of Burton Richardson? He's a Jeet Kune Do guy.
Yes, of course. Yeah. He also does Zulu stick fighting.
That's the guy, and I've trained with him a number of times. He's terrific. He's very, very open-minded, and he brings loads of things together. And I remember going into his class and having a similar experience to what you just said. But he put a helmet on, with a cage on the front, so you weren't going to get black. He basically said to the guy on top, and it was full mount. It was just basically go. And I got hit a few times. Eventually got out of it, but got hit a few times. And I said to him, "Wow, it's like being in a washing machine." And I was like, "Man, I just discovered that I get hit a few times before I escape." And he just smiled and said, "Good knowledge, self-knowledge. Now you know what to work on." And I thought that was such a good approach. So, he was a big influence on me, because he also did the MMA. What the MMA guys did with the empty hands, i.e. taking everything, integrating it and pressure testing it, he did that with the weapons. So I was like, why can't you do that with the Kung Fu weapons? There's no reason why you can't do that with Kung Fu weapons. Exactly. So we ended up doing our Friday nights become our sort of weapon sparring night, and we were doing, swords and spears and sticks, but it was all like with padded weapons, wearing helmets and just gloves.
Like, seriously, why the hell not,
Why not? I mean, you get good by playing the game, right? And if you do it for real, you get injured. So there has to be a way of practicing it without getting injured, where you're still developing functional skill. And in the modern day, we've got this protective equipment. Why not use it?
I have specifically made sparring staffs and specifically made sparring swords, and we put on small little finger glove things, a headgear, and Bob's your uncle. If you want to put on a jacket, go. I don't. It stings a bit, but it's not the end of the world. So
have you ever done jiu-jitsu sparring with training knives?
I've played a little bit with that. Yeah,
fascinating.
It's a different world, man. But you're gonna die very quickly in a real situation. So.
How it changes.
Yeah,
but at least you spar with it and you're aware of it and you look out for it. Your chances of dying are less. Let's put it that way.
No, for sure. That's what all of this is. That's why to throw all of this stuff, to throw the baby out with the bathwater, not understanding the context, not understanding the environment, the history. You're losing a lot of valuable stuff. So. That's why I think all these, Chinese martial arts is broader because of the environment and the context and the society in which they were developed, in terms of what you use. Maybe in today's day and age, just being able to use a spear is not going to reap the same functional reward, but it was there for a reason. So people need to understand that
power generation and so on. It's useful, even if just for mechanics. But I mean, again, today we have CCTV, we have social media, so you don't need to surmise now. I mean, people still argue, but you can actually say, well, no, statistically, because people like FBI and stuff, do the crunch data. They analyze these things, like what's the most common attacks, where do these weapons come out, and you do find, and it is real, that an unarmed confrontation, you take the guy down, you're trying to control. And then he panics and pulls his knife out, because it's like, okay, I'm losing here. Out comes the knife. And just having that, when you see the hand go in, to then say, right, now I need to control that arm, just that simple change of mentality could be life or death. I mean, so people say, oh, that would never happen in a real fight. So, well, you can pull up 20 CCTV video clips to disagree with that,
I've got a friend who no, I mean, I spent many years, I grew up in South Africa, I lived there for a long time, so talk about a different environment. And he got mugged. He did jiu-jitsu as well. He got mugged, and he got mugged by one guy, and again, this is his ignorance that got him into this situation. So he decided to take the guy down, and he started choking him and triangling him, right? He put him in a triangle and started choking him. And the immediate thing for me, because I've been in those situations before, I'm like, they never mug you alone. There's somebody else lurking, you idiot. So
Yeah,
he got stabbed in the ass with a screwdriver by the other guy. But, you know, luckily it was the ass.
yeah.
So,
Could
but,
have been
you know,
worse.
if you're not thinking like that, you're not going to be looking for that. And it's similar. I mean, the guy himself could have pulled something out and stabbed him with it, you know? So, you know, there you
Yep.
go.
Yeah, little thing. I mean, just this one I got from Burton. It's like you're putting a triangle choke. The guy reaches into his back for his knife, and you immediately switch to the omoplata. Now, sounds silly, but you've immediately got isolated that arm, and you can work for a disarm. And it's like little things that if you hadn't been shown it or told, you wouldn't have that reflex. But
Yeah.
but having said that, you know, you don't go down. You don't try to go down.
Exactly.
It's like it's not plan A.
That's
usually.
not plan A. That's like contingency plan, you know? So,
Exactly.
yeah, anyway.
Still good stuff though, right? I mean, it adds spice to your training. It keeps it interesting.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think, you know, we've spent an hour and a half. I know you've got appointments
Wow.
and things. It's been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed hearing a bit more of your background and your perspectives. I think you've got a very healthy outlook. You've got a wealth of experience and knowledge. I think whoever's learning from you is very lucky. So
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this discussion. I'm glad I found somebody that's of your standing. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'll put your contacts, whatever you want shared in the show description, and
Sure.
you'll just send that through to me. So if anybody wants to contact you, they can.
They'd be most welcome. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, and you have a good day there.
You too.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.